Section 5, Video 6, Resource Management with CPU. In this video, we'll see how resource management manages CPU in a virtual infrastructure. SMP capability, vSphere 6.5, current version allows a virtual machine to have up to 128 logical processes. This allows enterprises to run the most CPU-intensive workloads on virtual machines. The ESXi CPU scheduler can schedule the virtual machine SMP processors on logical processors on the same core or on different physical cores. The CPU scheduler is advanced enough to detect the underlying processor topology and the relationships between processor cores and logical processors. Based on this information, it is able to schedule virtual machines and optimize performance. Virtual machines are preferentially scheduled on two different cores rather than on the same core, thereby improving performance and removing any dependencies. HyperThreading is a proprietary technology from Intel and makes the processor core behave like two logical processors, thereby increasing performance. However, the performance achieved, or the gain in performance, is about 20%, and the advantage is to be able to run multiple threads in parallel. CPU affinity can restrict a virtual machine to a subset of available processors. Use affinity as it reduces CPU scheduling options only as a use case. VM virtual CPU, it cannot have more virtual CPUs than the actual number of logical CPUs on the host. The logical CPUs are determined by looking at the number of sockets on the ESXi host hardware and determining the number of cores and getting a total logical CPUs. As an example, a host with 32 logical CPUs, a virtual machine can have a maximum of 32 virtual CPUs configured. CPU limit is another option that can be established. However, CPU limit without a proper use case can cause performance degradation, as the virtual machine is unable to use more CPU resources than allocated. For an SMP virtual machine, the sum of all vCPUs cannot exceed the specified limit. As an example, if we have a 4 vCPU virtual machine with the limit established at 1200 MHz and there's equal load sharing, this would result in a maximum of 300 MHz per virtual CPUs. Once each virtual CPU has utilized or used up its allocation, it has to wait and cannot be allocated more. So use CPU limit only when you have a very valid use case. To summarize, we looked at CPU scheduler and affinity and understand the special use cases when you should use affinity. We also looked at HyperThreading, which is an Intel proprietary technique, and limit, where again, as similar to the CPU affinity, only use it when you have a very valid use case. In the next video, video 7, we will look at resource management from a network perspective. Thank you for watching.